All right, thank you everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in a few minutes. For this webinar, all attendees will be muted. Please use the Q&A feature for any questions you may have. Questions from the audience will be answered towards the end of the program. So again, thank you for joining us today for the USC Alumni Veterans Network and USC Career Center program, Trojan Leadership, the transition from military to civilian career. I am Martin Ariola. I'm one of the board members of the Alumni Veterans Network and a former Marine Staff Sergeant. And again, veterans tend to find it challenging to navigate the significant transition from military to civilian life. Tonight, our panelists will share their journey from military to service to supporting veterans. Our distinguished panelists include Dr. Blas Villalobos, Ms. Bridget Austin, and our moderator, Mark, I'm sorry, sir, Rostov.
Very good.
Got it right. So, I'll be sharing a quick bio of each one of our panelists. Dr. Blas Villalobos currently serves as Director of Veterans Affairs at Chapman University, where he provides resources and services for student veterans and their families. Prior to this position, he managed Mayor Eric Garcetti's Office of Veteran Affairs and served as an Executive Director of Community Programs for U.S. Vets. Dr. Villalobos is an active member of our California Community College Board of Governors and VA's Advisory Committee on Adjustment of Veterans. After serving in the United States Marine Corps, he attended Long Beach College University, California State University Long Beach, and earned his master and doctorate degree in social work from USC. Ms. Bridget Austin is a retired U.S. Navy combat veteran and CEO of B. Austin Consulting, a training and development consulting company specializing in professional services focused on program management, learning, and educational development. As a coach and mentor to veterans transitioning service members, Bridget's passion is in finding ways to leverage the dividend in talent, communication, and skills translation by assessing and bridging solutions to the gaps in reintegration within the workforce. Bridget earned her Master's of Business for Veterans from USC's Marshall School of Business and currently resides in San Diego, California. Mark Rostov is the Assistant Dean and Director of Graduate Career Service at USC Marshall School of Business and leads all aspects of the career service process. Mark received a commission in the United States Navy Medical Service Corps in 1982 and retired as a commander in 2002. He received his Master's of Health Administration from Washington University in St. Louis and his BA from Alfred University, Alfred, New York. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to our panelists and moderator, Dean Rostov. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Martin, and welcome and good evening, everybody. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So we, rather than just talking to you, we really welcome the questions. So use the chat, and we'll hopefully you'll get some helpful information. But more importantly, if you have something on your mind, let's have a discussion on some of the areas. Tonight's really the idea that I want to do as a moderator is really have us talk about our journey. How did we go from military service to civilian? So just briefly, Bridget, if you could just start off, what was your journey and how did you get to where you are, coupled with your military service?
Absolutely. Actually, today marks 4 years since my transition from the Navy, and I started out as a structural mechanic, aviation structural mechanic, consisting of non-destructive testing, quality assurance, safety. As a safety rep, I moved on to the maintenance production control area, and then division leading chief petty officer. After 15 years and a major promotion to chief, I actually did a pivot in my Navy career and converted to career counselor. My reasoning for converting was I was successful as a structural mechanic in the maintenance arena, but I learned and noticed that there was a lot of miss and disconnects with the sailors coming in as far as their career and where they were going with their careers. So I decided to make that conversion, and my first stop was on an aircraft carrier of 3,000 to 6,000 sailors on a CVN of the USS Harry S. Truman, where I learned how to manage a career information team of 158 so that we could take care of our sailors, whether in port or out to sea. I moved on from the CBN and as the lead career counselor, as a senior counselor, and I moved on to Echelon 2 at the Mid-Atlantic region. So I was the career counselor for the shore installations in the Mid-Atlantic area. Then I became the regional career counselor in Guam, where I taught transition assistance and Navy goals with the new name or the old name. Anyway, then I moved on from Guam and took my last two years of naval service at the Navy Special Warfare Center, where I worked with the reassigning candidates that did not make it through the Navy SEAL program. Now, I say 2 years because those 2 years is a critical timeline in preparation for transition, as most of you probably know or should know. During that 2-year preparation, I actually got transition assistance. I attended TAPS quite a few times, as well as I taught the workshop, and I began building my individual career plan or my portfolio. The mentorship I received during that process was critical as well, going through the American Corporate Partners, the Veteran Career Transition Program, Reboot, and the SkillBridge program. SkillBridge being the program I utilized to bridge my employment divide from active service to civilian while still on active duty. I worked in the SkillBridge program, and I did an internship in staffing and recruitment as a HR business partner, and I had a mentor training me for that. And then I moved on to a veteran fellowship program where I actually worked with the Human Resource Information System, and where I also learned of the bridge or the divide in military skills translation and how the civilian workforce didn't necessarily know how to place us in their organization. So I resigned from that position as a veteran fellow, and my resignation was rejected, and I was offered a position as a consultant. And that was because of the knowledge I had, the vast knowledge I had as a veteran and in the workplace. My challenge with that was, if I was being underutilized, how many other veterans out there were being underutilized? So needless to say, I rejected the offer and decided to become a career coach for postgraduates of the Reboot program, where I also learned that veterans had a divide or a gap in translation with what employers' expectations were of them in the workplace. There's where I started my business, working with veterans as a coach and mentor to help them with that translation and to help connect them with the resources available. And how I was also provided the opportunity to speak at USC, the MBB program, and the entrepreneurship workshop on small business development, small business ownership, and ultimately became a student, and where I learned a vast amount of knowledge on not just owning a business, but how to scale in the business. And here I am here today to share with you those experiences and provide any other resources I can.
Well, I'm definitely going to follow up after Blay does his intro, because mentorship is one of the, and the support system is one of the topics that I want to make sure that we cover as a panel. Blay, what was your journey?
Was that me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, it's quite an interesting one, actually. I left the Marine Corps in 2003, so late 2003. I did one deployment to Iraq during the whole Nasiriyah ordeal. In my case, when I tried to re-enlist, I didn't want to stay in the infantry, so I tried to lat move. And unfortunately, at the time, there were so many young men and women enlisting that the re-enlistment officer basically said, look, you either stay in the infantry or you move on. You need us more than we need you at this point. And he didn't mean that in a bad way, but that was just the way it was. So I decided to go back to school, went back to school, started at Long Beach City College. But prior to that, I did try to go back to my hometown in West Texas. The nearest college for me there was about 60 miles or so. It was completely not impossible, but it was going to be very difficult for me to go back and forth every day. Outside of that, West Texas, big oil field area, was not interested in doing any of that. Nothing wrong with it, but just it wasn't my thing. So I went back to school, started here in Long Beach City College. It was then that I actually started working with veterans. So back in the spring of 2004, Veterans Resource Centers were completely a new thing. I mean, they were non-existent. I mean, we didn't really start talking about VRCs until around 2008, 2009. So you can imagine going back to school in 2004, not really knowing which direction to go. But thankfully, I had someone there who guided me through the process. It was then that I started to notice that a lot of the younger vets who were coming back and were registering for classes at Long Beach City were putting down the same address. So I started looking into it, found out it was a program for veterans who were homeless. Just couldn't understand why or how someone could be homeless, right? Because the person that comes to mind when we think about homelessness isn't 23, 24-year-old, veteran. So started looking into it. That's how I was first introduced to US Vets. I ended up being offered a position at US Vets while I was at Cal State Long Beach, right before I graduated in 2008. Graduated in 2009, started with US Vets in 2008. And that just opened up my career. It was then as an outreach worker that I realized how prevalent, all these issues were. We completely, in my case at least, I had no idea that veterans were dealing with mental health, housing, and employment problems at the time. I typically associated those problems with the older veteran population. But that's when I realized that it was a much larger problem than it really was, or we thought it was. So I started as an outreach worker, became a case manager. So I managed the Iraq and Afghanistan homeless veterans program. After that, I got accepted into USC, completed my master's in social work there, and I went back to the organization, which I had left for about 6 months to finish my last semester at USC. And my former CEO and my mentor, going back to mentorship and networking, my mentor, basically put me in charge of creating programs that were going to help veterans, either find employment, deal with mental health issues, and also homelessness issues. So I managed 3 programs while I was an executive director for US Vets. It was an employment program, the Career Development Initiative, which I actually started from scratch. That program helped place veterans into jobs. Approximately 400 to 600 veterans every year between Hawaii, DC, Houston, Phoenix, and then here in California. Managed mental health program, which provided and continues to provide mental health services for veterans at the community college level, 21 different community colleges. And then we had a housing program at the time as well through SSVF. That's when I was recruited by Mayor Garcetti to run his Office of Veterans Affairs. And then that ultimately, ended with Chapman University recruited me to start their brand new Veterans Resource Center. But going back to networking, I know that was mentioned earlier, and I can tell you through the ACP program, through my former CEO, who was my mentor as well, and continues to mentor me throughout my career, and several other individuals along the way. Without networking and mentorship, it would have been a lot more difficult. Now I'm at a point in my career, obviously, where I can give back and I can, help other veterans just like I have before, but now offering more insight and more knowledge about what the transition can be like, what we can do to help each other out, and then also, participating on different boards. As it was mentioned earlier, I'm on the VA Veterans Advisory Committee and the Readjustment of Veterans. So we deal with transition and anything associated with transition for any veteran. So it's been quite a ride. It's been very interesting, to say the least, to see that the evolution, right, between not having a VRC at the community college to not having a VRC at almost every single community college and university in the country that serves veterans, and being able to go back and actually contribute to the involvement and the best practices that provide those services for veterans.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, you brought up mentors and support system, which I'm going to get to here in a moment. When you said the old time vet, I hope you didn't mean me. I'm a true Cold War veteran, but I did serve in Desert Storm and Desert Shield, and deployed on several ships and enjoyed my Westpac journeys. The ship behind me is an LHA-1, the USS
Is that
Tarawa.
the Tarawa?
That's the Tarawa. I served
I
on
was on the
that.
Tarawa
That
in
was my
2003.
second tour out of San Diego. My plan is to get down to see her. She's sitting there in Pearl Harbor. And we were hoping that maybe they would consider recommissioning her and get her back out there. But no, my journey obviously was in the support function as a medical service corps officer. And actually, operational medicine was a track that would have ended up stopping somebody's career back in the 80s and 90s. So it was a lot of fun working at UMed in Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. They've changed the title. I think it's now the National Medical Command. But more importantly, I want to kind of delve into a couple of thoughts from the two of you. First, I think it's really important to talk about the challenges that vets have with working with civilians in the private sector. The military provides us a lot of structure, and makes us fantastic leaders. And I think there's no doubt about it. Everyone here feels that and knows that there's a lot of growth potential. But transitioning to the private sector, and civilians who may not really understand the training, the time commitment, the 12 on and 12 off duties. So what type of advice could we provide the audience with working with civilians in the private sector and adjusting to the environment? Because I think one thing that's important is the veteran needs to understand that the adjustment is a lot on their side, right? The private sector civilians have the way that they're working, and it's not, it's sometimes not compatible. So how do we help folks get through that adjustment period to recognize the private sector and civilians who have no real understanding of military service may need to be educated a little bit? So Bridget, what do you think? How could we help those out there who are ready to enter the private sector?
Excellent question, Mark. And that starts during that 2-year transition process. The reason I say that is because when you develop those mentors through the ACP, American Corporate Partners, and you do your skill bridge, you actually start to slowly adapt to the civilian workforce and the way that they collaborate. Our mindset is we're go-getters. We are strategic thinkers. We want to get things done. And we sometimes come in with that mentality and that attitude, and it puts civilians, in a place of defense off the bat. And so they don't know how to take us. So a lot of times that's how we end up in probably the lower level of employment. We don't get really the leadership roles because they're afraid we're going to come in there and start making changes right away. It's a mindset and it's a psychological piece. So getting hired is not our problem. We can sell ourselves all day long. Being engaged and staying engaged is the challenge. So my recommendation off the bat would be just once you get into that organization, look around, learn your environment, find out where the ERP program is. If there's a veteran program, find it and become a part of that organization in a positive way. Let them learn what you're developing and what you're bringing to the table production-wise. Don't go in there trying to prove yourself and showing them what you're bringing to the table. That will already come into play in due time.
Yeah, I think that's great advice in terms of preparing before you get out. I think a lot of service personnel actually wait until they leave, right? They get the discharge and then they start thinking about the civilian world. Back all of these programs didn't exist when I was in, or where they were really down. They were there, but here's a pamphlet and go on your own. Sounds like there's a tremendous support network, and I really like the advice. You have to start before you leave. Blay, what about you in terms of adjusting to that environment? And then I'm going to throw a second question to you, and then we'll go back to Bridget. The support system and mentorship. I mean, clearly, the amount of veteran homelessness is a tragedy in our society. But clearly, the support system. So I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because that's right there in your wheelhouse. And again, tie that into the idea of how do you start building that before you actually leave the service.
Absolutely. So definitely the mentorship part, starting while you're still in the service. As Bridget mentioned, ACP's America Corporate Partners is a great program. I actually went through, I participated in that program. And what was really interesting about it was that my mentor had already been in the for-profit sector and the civilian world for a number of years. So some of my questions related to dealing with employers, dealing with other employees. Thankfully, a couple of things have happened in the last several years, which have made our transition a little bit easier. One is record numbers of veterans are actually going back to school. So here in California, for example, about 93% of veterans who return to school are actually starting at the community college level. So we know where they are. One thing that does for us as veterans is it actually gives us the opportunity to start interacting with civilians again and learning how to go back, how to go from a rigid, as people describe it, mentality and way of life to something more relaxed, right? Where we are able to, engage and talk to other people. Not that we're robots or anything like that, but the way that we are described when we first leave the military can be quite telling. So that's number one, right? The community college, going back to school or going back to the university, transferring gives us the opportunity to sort of acclimate again to civilian life. And the others in the workforce side, what we are seeing is more and more employers actually training their HR, their staff members to learn how to, handle certain situations when we're talking about veterans, right? How to interact with veterans, culture, learning more about our military culture, so that when we do talk to them, they're not left in the dark as far as what we refer to or what we're talking about when we're talking about, our fire watch duty or any other type of, event or things that we did while we're in the military. But going back to mentorship, I think that's probably one of the most important things. And one of the very first things that I believe veterans should start looking into even before they leave the service. And the reason for it is there's, at least in my experience, there was always one at every single intersection. There was someone there, and it happened to be a veteran, and every single time happened to be a Marine, believe it or not. But there was always someone there at that intersection who pointed me in the right direction. One population that unfortunately we tend to overlook um, is the Vietnam era population. My mentor is a Vietnam era veteran, highly successful. Um, I couldn't imagine talking to someone from that era because I didn't think that we had anything in common. However, when you think about it, these are individuals who have successfully navigated our world for many, many, many years. Many of them with several challenges, whether that was mental health or housing issues. I mean, they've already experienced a lot of those challenges for us. Having a mentor from that era made it a lot easier for me. Not just because he was already established in his career, but also because at the end of the day, when you think about it, it gives you a lot of hope. If you're someone who's dealing with mental health issues or any other challenges as a result of your service, and then on top of that, you're throwing transitional, items into it. When you talk to someone from that era, it really does give you the confidence that you need, because you realize that even though you're going to be dealing with some of these issues for the rest of your life and you are going to be facing challenges, it is possible to be successful. And that was the very first obstacle I had to overcome. And that was something that came from my mentorship experience with that individual. And realizing at the end of the day that, yes, we are going to be struggling at some point, but there are people there that can help you out. People that have already navigated a lot of these challenges successfully that you can reach out to. And on the other end of it is also making ourselves available, right? We've already navigated some of these issues as well. And it really does, I really do believe that it is our responsibility to turn around and actually help others the way that we were helped along the way. But networking, strengthening your network, um, participating in mentorship programs, that definitely made a big difference. And then just reaching out to more and more individuals to expand your network as well. I mean, that's going to help you as you move along and as you start your career and you start looking for employment. And then last but not least, I mean, there are a lot of programs out there that help veterans find employment. The employment program I used to run, for example, it didn't focus on veterans that were dealing with barriers to employment. We're actually looking at the population that couldn't qualify for employment services because they were not unemployed or underemployed, or they were not dealing with homelessness, they were not dealing with mental health issues. So the preventative services that we provided focused on providing services that would get veterans the job they needed and really prevent them from going into crisis mode. So there are several programs out there that can provide those services. Nothing wrong with accessing those services. I actually just referred 15 of my veterans at Chapman to several of those programs because they're graduating in December. So now we're having to find them employment, help them find employment and things like that. So those services are there for us to use. And it's something that it often goes unused because we think that you have to meet a specific, criteria to be eligible for those services when in fact you don't.
Yeah. You talked about some terminology. Every time I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I think of mid-rats, right? Going back, all I remember is that big tub of peanut butter sitting out with it. But to this day, when I make it, I know I'm immediately back at sea. I want to pivot, Bridget, because I think one of the key items that you're all underlining, and mentorship is important, and there's a lot of support network, but the veteran also needs to learn how are they going to identify the transferable skills? Because the skills that they've learned, that we've all learned in the military, I mean, there's not a day that doesn't go by that I'm not thinking about some experience that I had in 20 years in service. But when I talk to young veterans and I talk to folks who are coming out, they don't think they have any skills. They think, well, why would a civilian company want to hire me? I was a grunt. And clearly, I think that is one of the challenges we have is being able to help identify that. So, Bridget, how do we help veterans out there identify how valuable they are in the civilian sector and not to underestimate their transferable skills?
Excellent question, Mark. Excellent question. And Blas, you mentioned it when you said success. And one of the things we have to identify right away is what does success mean to us? Because once we start comparing ourselves with others, we lose ourselves and we forget what we're bringing to the table. So that's what's so important about building that portfolio. You're supposed to go to your transition workshop and bring 5 resumes. Okay, great, you've got 5 resumes. But if you don't know how to transfer that knowledge to civilian speak, then you're going to be lost in the sauce once again before the interview. So a lot of people put, a lot of stake in the resume. The resume is a marketing tool, and by no means a means to the end. However, the resume is getting you a seat to the table so that you can tell your story. So to be able to tell that story, you have to be able to build that portfolio and understand who you are, because once you understand who you are, you understand what you're bringing to the table, and then you can further identify who you want to work for and who you want to take those skills to the next level with so that you can provide the best you to that organization. So the key component to finding that connection is finding out who you are outside the uniform. I get so many clients that are putting their awards, their accolades, these are the things that, okay, you did that in the military and that's great, nobody cares anymore. What are you going to do for that organization? Which means you have to do your homework. You have to study the organization you want to work for or you want to work with and decide, what can I bring and how am I going to explain that so I can be the only one and the number one candidate for this position? And that takes work. That takes focus, and that takes putting the time in before you transition and understanding where you stand. If you have a family, understanding financially where you stand and how you're going to be able to make this happen. A lot of individuals find themselves stumbling over and taking the first available job because they need the money. Okay, of course you need the money, but if you prepare yourself before you transition and you take yourself to your first job fair, you already know that you can get any job in there. You just need to walk in there with that attitude and understand, if you understand the company and what they're looking for, then you understand that you have the skills to provide and to satisfy that need or solve that problem. So again, it's the work that has to be put in prior to transition to prepare yourself to launch yourself in that role or in that position, and not be afraid to take one or two steps back to move forward.
Yeah, and pivoting to creating that transition plan to prepare for your new career. What tools are out there that can help veterans prepare this transition plan? Because I think you hit a key, and I'm sure Blas has the same. What about the transition plan? Is there some template? Is there something that they could do on their own? Because sometimes people don't want to ask others for assistance. They are very comfortable that they want to do it themselves. So what's the first step? Where do you find how do you make that first step?
That first step, a lot of Marines, Army, Navy for sure, and I believe Air Force, you have steps you have to take. And I believe there was a NAV admin that came out just last year that changed the course and the course of action and took it back to Transition Assistance Program and made it mandated for members to attend this program. You've got your Career Readiness Standard, which is your CRS. You've got your Transition Assistance Program, which is TAP, and you've also got your Soldier for Life for the Army, for starters. I mean, there's a lot of different plans out there, but those are the top three that you can pull off the internet, and they have a worksheet that you can fill out on your own without any assistance and guide you through your process until you are ready to sit down with someone and have that conversation.
Excellent advice. And again, with the internet, but the idea that, I love what you're doing, start before you get out, start thinking about that plan, and then start really identifying. Blas, you're working with a lot of vets. When they come to you and say, how am I going to find a military friendly employer? How do I know that these employers want to hire me? Resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in the LA County area are so many nonprofits that provide employment services for veterans and their families. I often refer them to these resources. I have friends who are actually running these programs just like I used to run my program. And the reason why those programs are important is because they've already established that relationship with the companies in the area. All these recruiters, every single recruiter that we worked with, whether it was through my program or the JVS employment program for veterans or Goodwill, Salvation Army, every single one of those recruiters sat through a presentation that helped them understand military culture, helped them understand what veterans bring to the table. And it made it easier for these organizations to identify the companies that were actually interested in becoming, I don't want to say veteran friendly, but actually learning more about the veteran population and tapping into a resource that was there, but at the time, no one was really paying too much attention to. Now, keep in mind that over 60% of veterans who leave the military don't really want to do what they did in the military, right? So that's what we're seeing, such an increase in the number of student veterans. And unfortunately, right, many of them are using that benefit as a source of income. So networking, identifying someone outside of the military before you leave the military makes it a lot easier. Now, many of us have worked with employers in the area. We know, which companies are hiring veterans and placing them into good positions, right? We all know that there are companies out there, and I'm not going to put any of them on the spot, but we all know that there are companies out there that will say, well, we're going to hire X number of veterans by the end of this year, and we're vet friendly and everything else. But at the end of the day, once you really dig into the numbers, you start seeing that the positions our veterans are being placed into are entry level positions when they in fact qualify for higher positions, right? So we're looking at companies that are going to be offering our veterans positions that they are qualified for, but not necessarily focusing on those entry level positions, right? And that was the number one priority for us. So getting veterans into positions that paid on average $50,000 to $60,000 a year, right? That was one of them. Positions that had upward mobility. That was another priority for us, right? If the veterans were going back to school and we knew that they were going back to school, we would work with them in identifying an employer that was going to accommodate their schedule so that they could continue to go to school, and then offer opportunities for those veterans after they graduated from school or any certification or training that they were going through at the time. So I would say, honestly, with the number of resources available in the LA County area, it makes it so much easier for us to refer veterans to someone, if we can't provide the help ourselves, obviously, to refer them to someone that can help them from A to Z. And that includes their resume preparation, that includes interviewing skills, that involves resources that they may be available for, benefits that they may be available for, and then identifying the companies and the jobs that they qualify for and making that introduction, right? But really walking them from start to finish. I mean, I wish I had had someone who worked with me on my resume, sit down with me and, went through some interviewing questions and prepared me for that interview so that I knew how to answer every single question to the best of my ability, but also sell myself in a way that gave the company the opportunity to see that I brought a lot to the table. That is what is out there right now, and that is what these organizations are able to offer. But we need to be able to share that information with our students or with our veterans as they leave the military. Another aspect of it is, not everyone's going to be able to go to that TAP program. I was just before the COVID hit, I was hired by a foundation to actually do some research on that. We were trying to look into the reality of the TAP program. Are veterans and junior enlisted actually able to go to the TAP program? How far in advance are they able to participate in that program, and how many times, right? Because our goal was to try and figure out whether they are really prepared when they leave the military or not, right? Another recommendation was to really have veterans identify and study and research the area they were going to move to. If you were moving to LA, where's the nearest VA? Where's the nearest resource center? Where's the nearest vet center? What resources are available, right? What benefits am I eligible for? How much is it going to cost for me to live there? Those are all questions that we often don't answer before we move. And then we find that in reality, it's a lot more difficult for us to succeed because we weren't well prepared for it. But that's why we have so many of us out there that we have already gone through it. So identifying those networks, those systems of mentoring programs that can help you prepare for that transition.
Yeah. You mentioned the VA. When I retired, I didn't even, think about the VA. And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, medical care, health, and the amount of services that they have and the benefits, you're absolutely right. But I'm going to pivot here because we're talking about veterans transitioning. Bridget, what about the military spouse? We're talking a lot, but I am not going to not have a question here on this panel without talking about the fact that it's not, now sometimes, not everybody, but what about the military spouse? How are we going to help them transition? Because they are as part of the military as all of us know as the servicemen.
The workshops I taught, if an individual was married, it was mandatory in my workshop that you brought your spouse for that reason, because now you've got two minds thinking together and you cannot transition without your partner. You've been in this relationship, however long you've been in the military, possibly, you're going to need the help from your partner. And they need to understand their role in the process. Bloss mentioned, something about, LA and, transition assistance programs. And you're absolutely right. Over 50% of my clients went to TAP about a month out of their transition and were not prepared because we don't know how to let go and transfer. And sometimes we're not able to let go and transfer that power. So when you're thinking about the spouse, the military spouse, you're also thinking location. Okay, so most people probably don't want to stay in California in their transition. And so what's available in those rural areas? What's available for those folks that want to go back home? And what's available to their family? So that's where the spouse comes in. And a lot of women, or a lot of military spouses, men and women, have become entrepreneurs for that reason. Because as with entrepreneurship, you can go anywhere and take your business with you. And so they stick with that as they transition out of the military, and now their spouse is looking for work, but they've got that potential steady income to keep them, to sustain them until that individual is able to find work, which gives them a little bit more of a pause and be able to relax a little bit and find and look for what they want instead of what they need. Additionally, LinkedIn is an excellent tool when you're talking about culture and military environment, because if you're looking for a military friendly employer, what better place, especially worldwide, nationwide, than LinkedIn, where you can actually sit down and have a virtual coffee with someone and talk one-on-one with somebody that was in the Marines, in the Army, in the Navy, and ask questions about the military culture in that organization, and match them up with somebody that has a spouse. So now the spouse has somebody to talk to and collaborate with upon their transition. So excellent question, Mark, with that, because the spouse is just as important. Their transition is the same as your transition. Their retirement is the same as your retirement, because they were there to help you get through those rough times and those easy times.
Absolutely right. And we have just a couple of minutes before we're going to take a Q&A. So I'm going to just throw out this final question to our panelists, because I think we've covered some great topics and there's some great resources being linked in the chat. Best advice. You got 60 seconds. The best advice. I mean, all of this has been fantastic, but what's the number one piece of advice that you want to give a veteran who is about to transition into the civilian world? Bridget, I'll throw it to you, and then Blas, I'll go to you, and then we'll take some Q&A.
My best advice is you're no good to anyone 6 feet under. Okay, so take care of yourself, plan accordingly, and communicate often is my advice to anyone that's transitioning out of the military. Whether you've taken the 2 years you need, or if you've got 6 months left, your VA disability benefits, do not bypass those. Get that in and get it done. So take care of yourself, your health, and that will follow with your family and your loved ones, and you'll be okay.
Great. And you know, you talked, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Blas, in a second, but VA disability, you know, when I retired, nobody told me about the fact that I should apply for my disability. I had injured my back, and so 10 years passed, and then finally I went into the VA hospital where I go every time, and then I just mentioned it. They said, "Oh, well, you need to fill out this form," and next thing you know, and I look back and realize, you know, you think, you know everything, right? And then it's simple things like that. Absolutely, there's so much out there. Blas, same question to you. Best advice. Top of the list.
Well, I'm glad, you know, Bridget covered the taking care of yourself portion of it, because that is definitely important. I would say, you know, depending on where you are going to live or where you want to live, identify veterans networks in those areas. LinkedIn is an amazing tool. LinkedIn as a veteran can offer you a 1-year free premium subscription that gives you access to a lot of information, a lot of people out there. One of the first things I did when I was able to register through LinkedIn was reach out to veterans who were in the career path that I wanted to be. And I just started cold calling them, emailing them, reaching out to them for advice and hoping that they would return my calls. And they did, you know, in my emails. So reaching out to the veteran population out there that you feel is in the same career path as you, and then talking to them, sitting down with them, and finding out more about what it is that you need to do if that is where you want to head in your career. And the other is just start looking at all the resources that are available to you, right? Every community is going to offer different resources. LA is known for having very good employment programs for veterans through our nonprofits, but those are going to be different resources than what you may find in Washington, D.C., for example, or in Houston, Texas. So really know the area that you are going to be living in and identify the local resources and benefits that will be available to you when you get there, and start reaching out proactively, you know, to those people and those resources.
Yeah. You know what, my piece of advice and something that I did is I immediately started, I still get the Military Officer magazine, and no one mentioned the VFW, you know, and maybe again, my age takes me back to the VFW because that's where everyone said you go. And I am still I'm a life member. And it's interesting, you know, the internet has changed it, but there's a lot right there. And I would recommend anybody join a post. You don't have to be very active. But the information that they have, sometimes if you need legal advice, you need your military record reviewed, those type of tangibles you get from the VFW as well. It may sound old and corny in this day and age, but I found it to be invaluable to get that. And just get the monthly magazine and the newsletters, and you start reading and you start realizing that our community as veterans is much larger than just the classroom that you're sitting in or where you're working. It is, millions strong globally, and none of us, nobody should ever feel that they're alone doing it. I want to thank both of you as panelists, and we are going to open it up for questions. And I believe that Martin may have a couple of questions that came out of the chat room.
Yeah, if I could, either Bridget or Blas, if you could, maybe take a minute or two. What are the common personal and professional challenges working with civilians in the private sector, and any recommendations to adjust into their environment?
Personal, I'll go ahead and I'll start. Blas, you can finish this, but personal and professional, again, we're very high intensity, and we're very involved in what we do, and finishing the job is our mission. We're mission essential, and everything falls under those lines. And the difference in the private sector is hurry up and wait. We said that 1,000 times in the military. Get used to it, because just because you see a way forward and a path doesn't necessarily mean it's the path that's going to be followed. But if you stay around long enough, you can make the change, but not right away. So professionally and personally, you have to really mentally put yourself in a position to embrace what you're learning and embrace your environment. And then once you've learned that, then you can step in and get comfortable, but don't start out kicking down doors and taking names. And look into if their company has a succession plan, the growth of the company. Do you want to be a part of that company, or are you just getting a job? Your next job should be your next career. So keep that in mind on the personal level and a professional level.
Yeah, I'd say wrap that up and pass it over. Patience. You have to be patient with those civilians. Because the pace is going to be a lot different, the quality, the attention to detail. I think that was the biggest challenge that I had, was just the attention to detail and the camaraderie. You have to have patience to realize that's what I think really separates the veteran from the civilian is recognizing that, and the pace of work. 5 o'clock, everyone leaves their desk and work is undone. You would never be doing that, right? That's you work until the job is done. Not go how long it is, but in the civilian world, hell no, right? The horn sounds and people leave. So I think you have to develop that patience, and sometimes with that comes a big adjustment. I think that's one of the biggest. Blas, pass to you for that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, know your environment, as Bridget mentioned, right? I mean, we are by nature, we are go-getters. We finish the job. We are motivated. Civilians don't often understand why we are that way, right? They automatically associate it with our military service. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when they don't understand where you come from and why it is that you are the way you are, people get scared, right? Or they get nervous around you. So one of the easiest way and quickest way as well to acclimate yourself to that environment is identify someone within that company, within your area, that is a veteran. And have a conversation with that person. I mean, I've talked to countless veterans, just over coffee, about how I dealt with certain situations in the workplace. I mean, these are all questions that you can ask, and you can learn to start dealing with those situations. I mean, at the end of the day, the way that veterans are trained, and they are by nature, we are team players. We are not quitters, right? We are extremely persistent. That, on top of all the other skills that we can apply to the workplace, will automatically make you shine in that environment. But we want people to understand where we come from, so that they're not getting nervous around us, right? When we start doing what you said, right? They show up at work the next morning to find out that we were there till 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, right? That's just who we are. But they need to understand that in order to work better with us.
Thank you,
Mark,
guys.
do we have another question?
Yes, sir. What steps would you suggest to create a transition plan in preparation for a new career? Like you guys, I think it was Loss, you mentioned 60% do not go into the field that they were in the military. What's the best way to transition into a totally different field? I know myself from personal experience, I was a firefighter. I'm not a firefighter now, I'm an operational manager. So I had to adjust my experience to that sector. So how would you suggest is the best way for someone looking into a new career to adjust?
Well,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, boss. Okay.
I was going to say, I mean, you really have to take a look at what it is that you want to accomplish, right? The vast majority of us didn't know what we wanted to do as far as a career is concerned when we first left the military. I mean, my only viable option was to go back to school. Now, the resources that veterans are getting nowadays are incredible, right? You can go to school for free practically if you use the Yellow Ribbon benefit and GI Bill benefits. And it gives you an opportunity to identify the career field that you want to go into. Once you get to that point, I would say the next step is going to be to identify a mentor within that field that can guide you through the process. There are going to be times when you think that you may want to go into clinical work like I did, only to realize through an internship that that was really not the way I wanted to go for a number of reasons, right? But I had a mentor, I had a person there, a veteran who actually guided me through that process. I mean, once you identify what it is that you want to do, or you're at least within the ballpark, you can start working towards that in a way that you have options to switch directions if you need to, because you have plenty of time as you're going through school. If that's what you want to do, you have plenty of time to adjust based on what your career field is going to be, or you may think you want it to be. So that's one good way of doing it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna piggyback a little bit, but you said it, mentors, American Corporate Partners. That was a phenomenal tool that I utilized to help acclimate me and educate me on the field that I wanted to get into, and realize that wasn't what I wanted to do. And that's okay. And that's what's important about utilizing a Veterans Career Transition Program. A lot of these programs are available prior to transition so that you have time to spend figuring out what's not going to work and what is going to work. So a lot of us, we don't really know what we want to do. We've been doing something 10, 15, 20 years and realize this isn't it. So that's where you reach out, you do your portfolio, because your portfolio is going to identify where your strong points are, and it's also going to help you translate that onto your resume and have a conversation about what you're good at and what you enjoy and how that correlates to what you want to do with your next career.
Awesome. So I got a question from Katharina. Do you have any recommendations, resume builder / reviewer sites that can assist in providing feedback and translating our skills to a desired job position? Transition assistance in my location is pretty much non-existent because of COVID, which is extremely understandable. The only option we have is a self-paced course online. So whoever wants to take that, we got one more, I think time for one more question, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up.
I shared a little booklet that actually has a resume writing guide for starters, and it kind of explains what the resume is about, why you put certain things in certain organizations, and what it means and how to use that tool. I recommend you take a look at that and reach out to me if you like, and I've got a resource page on my website and an abundance of resources nationwide for resume writing and assistance, free of charge.
All right, and our last question for whoever wants to take it. For someone who may be an introvert, any tips for reaching out to a mentor? Sometimes I don't know how to take the first step. So there's that challenge of taking that initial step to reaching out to somebody. I think, Blas, you might have addressed it a little bit earlier. If you want to expand on that.
Absolutely. I mean, reaching out to someone you don't know is always going to be a little bit nerve-wracking, right? You're reaching out to a veteran who you have no idea whether he or she is going to be receptive and reply, but the only way to know is by reaching out to that person. Now, I'm banking on the fact that most veterans are willing to help each other throughout this process, right? At least that has been my experience. If you have any questions, any concerns about it, I mean, get my information from Faith, and I'll be more than happy to, be the conduit and get you introduced to my network. And depending on what your career goals are, identify someone that can help you out there. Now, one last thing is, don't limit yourself to veterans either. My ACP mentor was actually a civilian. And the reason why I chose a civilian was because every single other mentor I had prior to that was a veteran within my field. So I wanted a different perspective on how to respond to different situations, both as an executive director, as a supervisor, as a manager, in a way that was not influenced by veteran mentorship 100%, right? So don't limit yourself to veterans. There are plenty of people out there who can help you out who are not veterans. But the very first step, send an email, call somebody, right? I mean, I can be your very first call if you want me to, and I'll be more than happy to, start working with you on that. And from there, I mean, your network is just going to expand. Bridget can also be a great resource as well. I mean, that's just, you just have to do it. That's the only thing.
And take advantage of our virtual world.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We hope you guys enjoyed tonight's event. The USA Alumni Veterans Network hosts programming events throughout the year, ranging from community service projects to informative presentations like tonight that appeal to Trojan vets of all ages and interests. Please make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn at USC AVN to stay connected and learn about our upcoming events. Thank you again to all our panelists, Mark, Bridget, Blas, for joining us this evening. Again, if you guys have any concerns, questions, their profiles are available in the emails that were sent out. Thank you guys. You guys have a great night. And as always, fight on.